Today, I want to talk again about one of my favorite Nintendo franchises, Animal Crossing. And while this is a series that I could talk about endlessly for hours on end, this video I want to focus on one particular question. Just when exactly are we getting the next Animal Crossing game? Because even though we have heard literally nothing about the next installment in the series, I think it might actually be coming quite soon. In fact, I think we might be getting it in just a couple of months. Let's talk about why. Let's start with this. Did you know that the last installment in the Animal Crossing series, New Horizons, is just a couple of months away from being 5 years old? New Horizons released on March 20th, 2020. It's an easy release date to remember since it coincided almost perfectly with the world shutting down due to the coronavirus pandemic. But yet, it's still hard to believe that that game is 5 years old. Maybe it's partly due to the pandemic-induced time warp that happened shortly after it released, but man, time flies. The important thing to note here, though, is that if we just look at the usual Animal Crossing series release cadence alone, there's precedent to believe that the next installment probably isn't too far off. There's a 4-year gap between the original Animal Crossing and Wild World, and only a 3-year gap between Wild World and City Folk. 4 years after City Folk, New Leaf released, and while it's true that there was a substantially longer 8-year gap between New Leaf and New Horizons, there was also a couple of Animal Crossing spin-offs sprinkled in during that time. But we won't get into all that. The less said about Amiibo Festival, the better. So if we look at the 8 years between New Leaf and New Horizons as the outlier, then it's reasonable to believe that the next Animal Crossing game should be right around the corner, or hell, should have even released by now. Obviously, we have to factor in the fact that games are more complicated and take substantially longer to develop today than they did back in the early 2000s, so it's not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison, but based on past history, you would think that the next Animal Crossing game is at least pretty far along in the development cycle at this point in time. And the other thing that leads me to believe that this is the case is it seems like the New Horizons team most likely moved on to the next game in the series quite a while ago. Look, I love New Horizons, and if you want to know more about my thoughts on that game and the future I think that the series should take, I have an older video about all that and I'll link it in the description below. For the sake of this discussion though, I think the one aspect of New Horizons that is worth noting here is that the post-release support for that game was a little bit lacking. There were a couple seasonal updates that they added post-release, which probably should have just been in the base game, and then they released the very good DLC expansion Happy Home Paradise in November of 2021. But after that, additional content and support for the game came to a screeching halt. As much as I would have loved for Nintendo to continue to support New Horizons for the bulk of the Switch lifecycle, they clearly had other plans in mind, and the most logical assumption for what those plans were was to begin work on the next game in the series right away. Work on New Horizons has largely been wrapped up for the past 3 years, and while it might have been disappointing not to get more support for the title at the time, it might be benefiting us now, as it probably greatly accelerated the timeline for the next game. As I said earlier, possibly even into this year. And that brings me to the second, and probably biggest reason why I think that we might be getting the next Animal Crossing game in 2025. It feels a little surreal when I say it, but we're going to be getting the successor to the Nintendo Switch sometime later this year. And there's no doubt in my mind that Animal Crossing would be the perfect Switch 2 launch title. Other than a more powerful model, we still have no idea what Nintendo wants to focus on with its next console. However, I think it's a safe bet that one of the areas it's going to want to improve in is how it handles online connectivity. Connecting and playing with friends on a Nintendo console might never be as easy or seamless as it is on a PlayStation or Xbox console, but that doesn't change the fact that it's 2025, and it would simply be unacceptable for Nintendo to continue to trot out the archaic online systems that the original Switch utilized. Overly complicated friend codes and needing to use a separate app on your phone for voice chat are things that we cannot have this time around. And I think even Nintendo knows that. In that same vein, one of the biggest disappointments of Animal Crossing New Horizons was its online functionality. Visiting your friends' islands was a fun enough time, but it was hampered by the Switch's cumbersome friend code system and even worse by its absurdly long online load times. I didn't even play New Horizons online all that much, and yet the cutscene of someone arriving to my island via plane is burned into my head forever because it took that long to get through. I can only imagine how tedious it would have been for players who did play online regularly. In other words, the goals of the Switch 2 and the next Animal Crossing game are one and the same here. Both should be heavily focused on improving online capabilities, and what better way to show commitment to this improvement than by having the next Animal Crossing installment launch with the Switch 2 and it acting as a showcase for the console's revamped online functionality. Just imagine, no more cumbersome friend codes or minute-long cutscenes anytime someone comes to your town or island. Just seamless pop in and pop out multiplayer this time around. It just makes too much sense, honestly. Initially, I thought that the next 3D Mario was the perfect big launch title for the Switch 2, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought that Animal Crossing is an even better choice. In addition to being the perfect way to showcase any potential online improvements the Switch 2 will have, the Animal Crossing series would probably be able to move even more units than a Mario game at this point. At the time of recording, New Horizons has sold over 46 million copies. 46 million! Other than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which is in its own universe, at a whopping 64 million copies sold, New Horizons is the best-selling game on the Switch. The Animal Crossing games have always been cult classics amongst Nintendo fans, but New Horizons, with a little bit of an assist from a worldwide pandemic, catapulted the Animal Crossing series into mainstream popularity, and these days Tom Nook and Isabelle have every right to stand shoulder and shoulder with Nintendo's other mascots. I mean, hell, Super Mario Odyssey, the greatest Mario game ever made, has sold only 28 million copies. An extremely impressive number in its own right, but one that pales in comparison to New Horizons sales. What better way to cement Animal Crossing as a flagpole Nintendo franchise than making it the marquee game to release with the Switch 2? In addition to being an awesome moment for the franchise and all of us fans who have been with the series from the beginning, you gotta believe that the next Animal Crossing game would move units with the casual gamer demographic in a way in which Mario or any other Nintendo game just wouldn't be able to do. I mean, out of those 46 million people who bought New Horizons, I think a lot of them are going to want to dive into the next Animal Crossing game the second it releases. I know I will. So there you have it. This is all speculation, of course, but I think when you read the tea leaves, there are some pretty strong reasons to think that we could be getting the next Animal Crossing game when the Switch 2 releases later this year. But anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you could only pick one big launch title for the Switch 2, what would it be? Animal Crossing, Mario, or something else entirely? And as always, thanks to everyone for watching.